Hey there, Duke fans. This is Jason Evans. Welcome to the latest episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Oh boy, we got some big news for you. Just a few hours ago, we found out that the Blue Devils roster is not yet complete. Duke is adding Jacob Grandison, a transfer from Illinois. It is very big news, and we have to talk about it. I am here with Donald and Sam. Okay, actually, I'm not. Donald and Sam could not make it. They are both traveling right now and are not going to be able to join me on this podcast right now. I don't blame them. It's the summertime. We got to take a break at some point, and these guys are doing some really exciting, fun stuff, and we'll tell you about it on the next podcast. We're going to be doing a long, deep dive into what Jacob Grandison means for the Duke Blue Devils of next season when Donald and Sam get back in town in a couple days. I will do I want to give you a little bit of stuff on it. He is a 6'6" wing. Like I said, he played for Illinois last year. He averaged 9.6 points per game, 3.8 rebounds per game. The thing you're going to love is this is a guy who shot 41% on his three-pointers, and he took a lot of threes. He attempted more than 4.5 three-pointers per game. This is someone whose job in the Illinois offense was to catch three-pointers and make the shot. And he excels. He is a knockdown shooter in the catch and shoot. He's not someone who's going to create a shot for himself. He's not going to, take stuff off the dribble, take step back threes the way we saw AJ Griffin doing. He's a different kind of three-point shooter. He's a catch and shoot guy. He roams around the perimeter. He runs off screens, and he waits for you to lose track of him so he can bury you from deep. And he is a two-way player. On defense, he's not going to get a ton of steals. He's not going to get a ton of block shots, but he's going to make the smart play. He knows how to position himself. He won't be caught napping. He is considered to be a very, very good defender. The thing about Jacob Grandison is this guy is a sixth-year college basketball player. He's been around college basketball for a long time. He was born in April of 1998. He is exactly 1 month younger than Jason Tatum. I'm going to repeat that. Duke just added a player who's essentially the same age as Jason Tatum. And he joins Cale Catchings and Ryan Young as super experienced players, guys who've been in college basketball for 4+ seasons, who can educate this young team about what it takes to succeed at the highest level. Because, especially in Jacob Grandison, we're talking about a guy who has succeeded at the highest level. He was a starter last year for Illinois. Illinois was a very, very good ball club last season, and he was a key part of their team at both ends of the floor. It is highly possible, I think, that at least at the beginning of the year, Jacob Grandison will be starting on the wing for the Duke Blue Devils. Tyrese Proctor is still waiting on his paperwork, his visas, and things like that before he gets to the United States. He may not arrive. Hopefully it'll be July, but he may not arrive until August. That's entirely possible. And as a result, I think that at least early in the year, you're going to see Jacob Grandison as a starter on the wing for the Blue Devils. I think it probably means that Dariq Whitehead moves over to shooting guard. But if that is what Duke does, they're going to be starting a monster lineup. It is because Grandison's 6'6", Whitehead is 6'7", 6'8", and then you get these guys who are, pushing 7 feet in the post. Jeremy Roach will be the only starter for Duke who's shorter than 6'6". All right. I've given you some stuff there on Jacob Grandison. We're going to have a lot more on this in coming days. And like I said, I apologize that Donald and Sam couldn't join me at this moment, but I want to now get you to what we had originally planned for this episode. A few days ago, we sat down with Jay Bilas to talk about the NBA draft. Our first episode, a couple days ago, was about Paolo Banchero. And as we move down the line of the Dukies in the draft, we're now going to talk to Jay about AJ Griffin. The rest of this episode, everything else you're going to hear after this, was recorded a couple days ago. Hey, you know what? That's how we got to do it here sometimes. But I know you will enjoy it. There's some fun stuff still to come, including a really cool listener email that we're going to answer at the end of the podcast, which I think will have all of you talking, see if you agree or disagree with our answers to it. But let's get it started with Jay Bilas. Here is Sam Klein leading the conversation as we talk to the Duke legend, the ESPN draft analyst, Jay Bilas, about AJ Griffin.
All right, we are back with Jay Bilas. He is here again to talk NBA draft with us. Last time we were discussing Paolo Banchero. Jay, welcome back. Today we're going to dive into AJ Griffin. Of course, he was Duke's starting small forward by the end of last season, dealt with the injuries at the beginning of last year, and was really a revelation for Duke behind the 3-point line. He is projected to be a top 10 pick, but give me your sort of initial thoughts on AJ Griffin's draft position and what he's done either to help or hurt himself during this pre-draft process.
He's done nothing to hurt himself. He's only helped himself. The first thing you think of with AJ Griffin is he can really shoot it. He shot 46% from three. He had some huge games. I mean, obviously that game in the Smith Center against North Carolina where 27, he can really shoot it. He's got a great shot fake. He can stretch it, gets it off quickly. He's really got long arms and a good release and high release on his shot. And I think he's got the potential to be a very good defender in the NBA. He's a good defender at Duke. And, you know, he, as you guys know, he had some injury problems in high school where he wasn't able to play maybe his last year or so. I can't remember what Coach K had said. You know, it had been 18 months or something since he had really played. And so you saw a really quick rise and progression from Griffin throughout the course of the season. You know, he had some great games. He had some where he was not so great. Maybe, you know, he go in, you know, have a game where he had 6 points or whatever, but he's legit and he can really shoot it. And there are only a few guys in this draft that we're talking about in the top 20 that put up the shooting numbers that he did. You know, 46% from three is no joke with the number of reps that he had. And, you know, guys like Jabari Smith are up there that can really shoot it. And but he's chief among them. There's nobody in the first half of this draft that shot it as consistently and as well over the course of the season as AJ Griffin did.
You talked a lot about the shot, of course. And one of the things I think we noticed this season is that he has a bit of an unconventional approach to the 3-point shot. His feet are set a little wider, I think, that you traditionally see. And he doesn't have the quickest release, even though he's pretty accurate. Are either of those concerns about his ability to translate that skill to the NBA?
That'll improve. You know, his shot, getting it off quickly. You know, those things will all be refined and improve. You know, you shoot it to that level, you're not gonna become a worse shooter as you go on. He'll only get better. You know, you're not counting on anybody to shoot 46% in the NBA consistently over time. There are only a handful of guys that in the history of the game do that. But he's incredibly capable. So I don't see how he's going to get anything but better as he goes forward. And at, you know, in the top 10, you know, he's a little bit further down the line than a guy like Paolo Banchero. But if he goes 7, 8, 9, whatever it is, you're not necessarily looking for a guy at that range that is going to be your best player, but he's going to be a starter in the league for a long time. And I think he's going to do really well.
On the defensive end, I think the thing that was most intriguing to me coming into the season was just how mature his body was. He in the preseason photo for Duke basketball, AJ Griffin's not the tallest guy, but he looks like the most physically mature guy on the team. That being said, it's not like he's 6'10" with that body. He's 6'6", and that might even be pushing it. What do you think about the way that his size translates, particularly on the defensive end?
Well, I mean, he's not the tallest guy, but he's lengthy, and that's what really counts. Is he's got a wide wingspan and, you know, great frame. He's not an NBA, you know, spectacular athlete, but he's athletic. So he's a really good prospect, and I think defensively he's very good. He's not a pick and roll specialist. He's, you know, Duke didn't put him in a lot of pick and roll situations where he was the pick and roll handler. So I think he can certainly make a jump there as he goes forward, but he's got the skill set to be really, really good and really effective long-term in the NBA. He can stretch you and he drives it. He's a really good cutter. You know, he moves pretty well off the ball and he cuts very effectively. And I think in the NBA, with the way they stretch the floor and use the floor, I mean, you know, people forget the floor is 50 feet wide. It's in the half court, it's wider than it is long. And when you watch NBA games, they use the floor much more efficiently than you see in the college game. So he'll actually have more space in the NBA than he had in college to to move and cut, and he's very effective there.
You mentioned his lack of ball handling on the perimeter and not sort of being in that position in the pick and roll. Are there any other deficiencies or things that he's trying to work on during this pre-draft process or going into his first season that, fans should be giving him some slack for not having as he starts his NBA career?
Yeah, I mean, I know he's been working out and working on his ball handling and being more of a handler. That wasn't what he was required to do at Duke, but that doesn't mean he can't do it. Just because you're used a certain way, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. And he's capable. So he's one of those guys that I think we could look back in this draft and say why was he taken at 10 when he should have been taken at 4 or 5, whatever, or 2. I don't know. We'll see in the long run. But he's really capable, and that shooting piece is a big deal. When you can shoot it in the NBA, you can play for a long time. He can shoot it.
What are the concerns around his injury history, if any?
I don't know that. Those are decisions that franchises make in consultation with their doctor. So after the medical comes back, I don't have access to these medical reports. So what you hear are mostly rumors, and I don't trust what I hear coming up to the draft, because there is a lot of, you don't want to say, as some guys will say, well, coming up to the draft, some guys in my position will say, well, this is lying season. I don't go quite that far, but there is some disinformation out there where you'll hear something about a player and go, was that put out, kind of so that he drops down a little bit to somebody else. Those things do happen, where you hear something and it turns out not to be a concern. You've heard it over the years with regard to different players, but I don't have access to those medical reports. And so I wind up sticking with what I see more than what I hear.
We didn't talk about this much with Paulo, despite the fact that he comes from a bit of a strong athletic pedigree. So does AJ Griffin, though. How much do factors like that, which are not necessarily on the court factors, but off the court, sort of in the bloodlines, how much does that play a role in NBA teams' desire to draft a guy like AJ Griffin?
I think it's only helpful. There are times when a player will say, when a team will say, hey, this guy came out of this system. He's been well trained. He gets it, stuff like that. There are, and certainly, the fact that, his father played and he's been well coached throughout the course of his basketball life. And those are positives, positive check marks in his favor. I don't know that they're dispositive of the issue. That somehow if your dad didn't play in the NBA or something, you're further down the list, but it only helps.
Are there any systems, coaches, NBA programs that you think better suit AJ Griffin's skill set? Or it sounds like what you were describing is that he kind of fits the modern NBA well enough that he might be able to plug in on most teams and be a rotation player from his rookie season.
Yeah, he can be. He's going to be more than that if he stays healthy. I don't know. I mean, I tend to look at this from prospect rather than fit, because he could go 7, he could go 11, who knows? But he's going to be coveted because of his skill set and the fact that he can really shoot the ball.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to seeing where AJ Griffin goes. Jay Bilas, thanks again for chatting with us about some of these Duke prospects, and I'm sure we'll have you on again soon to talk more about more of the guys.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right. So once again, we thank Jay so much for joining. AJ, by the way, deep tease, Jay will be back with us on future episodes. We'll be talking about additional Dukies in the NBA draft. Probably going to have Mark Williams and Jay talking about Mark Williams coming up next. But before we get to that, we need to react a little bit to what Jay said and give our own assessment of AJ Griffin as an NBA draft prospect. Sam, I'll come to you first. What was your biggest takeaway from Jay's comments?
I think the thing we led off with was AJ shooting. That to me was the biggest revelation about him going into or through the season. We knew that he was athletic. We knew that he was strong coming into the year. You can just look at his, at his shape, and you can tell that the guy is ready to compete athletically. But the shooting was what really stood out, and I felt really good about Jay's assessment of AJ's shooting and the way that it translates to the NBA. My concern, as I mentioned, is when you watch his shot, it doesn't look like a lot of NBA guys' shots. He starts a little flat-footed. His legs are a little spread out. His shot's a little bit slower, I think, than you want from an elite NBA shooter. But to Jay's point, all of those are things that he's going to improve on, and he has such a solid foundation that the shooting should be an elite skill for him going forward. Does that mean he's going to be one of the very best shooters of all time? I don't know, but it'll at least make him, really playable and potentially a starter pretty early in his career.
I think when it comes to AJ, I think the best part about him is that he can create his shot, not just from a set position, but off the dribble, or just be able to create room to get his shot off. I think that was what made him so dynamite for Duke last year, is that he was able to find a myriad of ways to get the shot off, even though it may have been slower than average. But I do think that once he's able to kind of, get that shot release a little bit quicker, he's going to be that much more effective, especially the fact that he can create kind of a step back or step to the side three that is so common in the NBA. He's going to be able to create a lot of space for himself. And then once he hits that three, as you mentioned, he's able to get to the rack. He's able to be athletic and also a little bit creative inside the paint. I think the wide body stance of his shot, that might be tinkered with just a bit. But I mean, for me, I'm always of the position that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And his shot is definitely not broke. So I think he's going to be great if he can find a situation where he's able to not only create from the wing or take set shots, but also be able to find his rhythm through runners and through, just being able to go off the dribble to kind of fool some people into thinking that he's going to the basket and then stepping back and hitting that three that we love.
The thing about AJ Griffin that struck whole season was I feel like he deferred too much. Every so often we would see this guy take the ball to the basket, take the ball in the lane and do some really impressive stuff. And when you look at his body, you're just like, wow, this guy, this guy is sculpted. He looks like the son of an NBA player. I don't know why he didn't do it more often. And I guess, one of the things I would hesitate a little bit, in terms of where I might draft him, because most folks are projecting him to go in the top 10, perhaps as early as like 5 or 6. There are people out there who think he may go like 5 or 6. I just wonder. I think, to me, if he becomes a guy who uses that athleticism, that body to take the ball to the basket more, then yeah, man, I'm taking him. I'm happy taking him around the top 5. But if he's just going to be an outside shooter, just a 3-and-D guy, those are really valuable. But I'm not sure you're getting what you need off of him if you're taking him that high. And that sort of leads me to my question for you guys, which is, let's play our little over-under game. I'm saying 7.5. Is AJ a top 7 pick, or does he go outside the top 7? And I'm not asking where you would take him. I'm asking where you think he goes on draft day. Donald, I'll come to you first. Do you think AJ goes top 7 or outside the top 7?
This is probably the one that I'm going to have the most difficulty with, because my Detroit Pistons are sitting at 5. They have considered AJ Griffin with that 5th pick, but I think they've been leaning towards other guys in recent days. So I think he's going to be right at 7. I think right now you have Portland at 7. I think if they're going to be going through some offseason changes, but I think he could slide in right there as a shooter to complement. They just traded CJ McCollum during the season, so they're going to need another guard that's going to be able to shoot the 3 next to Dame Lillard if they're going to try and keep him around. I think he can slot in pretty well there. So I'm going to go 7, which I guess is what I don't know if that's over or under 7.5. I think he goes right at 7.
Sam, how about you?
I think I've got him just behind 7.5, sort of similar to the conversation we had the other day about Paolo Banchero. It's not that there's no like upside. There's tons of upside with AJ Griffin. I think you know what the upside looks like though. And when it comes to, I think Jason, you made this point about how NBA teams are looking for all this potential. There's things that guys can turn into. AJ Griffin is sort of more known as to what his skill set is and the type of player he's going to be in the NBA. And so you'll find a GM or two that'll say, fine. Like, I mean, great player, lots of skills, but is not sort of making you starry-eyed the way that some of the other prospects, you look at a guy like Shaedon Sharpe, that's sort of like the drafting on potential thing. So in the same way that Paolo Banchero, we think is going to fall to 3, but still very much could end up as the rookie of the year. AJ Griffin could very much, I think fall to 8 or 9 and still end up on the first team all rookie, just because I think that he's going to translate so well.
So I'm, I picked this 7.5 number because it's a difficult one. I'm also going to go over, which I guess means he goes the 7th pick. I'm not saying that I think that's the smartest move, but I think that teams are there's going to be some hesitation, especially on the speed of AJ's shot. His release is not super quick at the, for an NBA player. And I wonder a little bit, I think teams may be a little bit hesitant there. That said, I think that if I was actually a G and he was still on the board at number 7, I'd probably be all over him. I think people forget how young AJ is. He's very young for this class. He'll be one of the youngest guys in this draft, and the growth potential with that body and to continue to improve that shot is really tempting and really valuable at the NBA.
Jason, a bit of foreshadowing for our next episode, or the next guy that we're going to talk about in the next episode. I think if AJ Griffin is outside of the top 7, it's because Mark Williams has shot up so much that he kind of overtakes him in that top 7.
And that, my friends, is a tease. Nice job, Donald. Yes, we'll be talking about Mark Williams on upcoming podcasts. That's going to wrap it for our conversation about AJ Griffin. When we come back from the break, the best Duke games to watch. Are you a diehard Duke fan that doesn't have enough of the Duke history in your blood? We are going to tell you which games you need to watch from Duke's history to be the perfect Duke fan. That answer coming up. All right, Duke fans, welcome back. And we're going to get to an interesting viewer question now. Something that we got sent by Melissa Bauer just a few days ago that, we looked at it. We were like, you know what, that's kind of a cool thing to discuss, because not everyone who listens to the DBR podcast is a Duke historian. So Melissa said she became a Duke fan in 2013. And, the past 10 years as a fan has been amazing. But as she listens to the podcast, and she is a loyal listener, and thank you, Melissa, for tuning in, she notices that there are all kinds of things that get referenced that are outside of, the scope of her fandom. And so she said, look, it's a slower part of the college basketball year. Can you guys pick for me 5 games from before my time that I should go back and watch? And I love this question because we're not going to give you 5 games, Melissa. We're probably going to give you way more than that, because each one of us, Donald, Sam, and I, are each going to give you our 5 games you need to go back and watch. And the only criteria, gentlemen, is that must be prior to 2013, because that's when Melissa started becoming a Duke fan. So outside of the past decade, because I will say, if I was allowed to include the past decade, the Duke versus Kentucky game, again, when Zion and
2019.
RJ, 2018,
2018,
when they introduced themselves to the world, would definitely be on my list of the 5 games to watch. And I was actually thinking like the Louisville game that year when they came back, the huge comeback in the second half, that might be on my list as well. But those don't, and certainly something during the national championship year. But none of those, nothing before 2013. I want to hear your list. Donald, I will go to you first. Give me your list of the 5 games.
Okay, so my 5 games are this. Obviously, I'm going to go with probably my favorite game of all time, Gone in 54 Seconds. That's Duke versus Maryland in the regular season on the road in 2001. The next one.
Wait. Hold on. I'm
greatest-
going to immediately push back. Gone in 54
Wait.
seconds.
This is my list. This is my list, not your list.
I'm commenting on it. Dude, I'm hosting, dude. I'm allowed to do this. That game, there is an amazing final minute, and there's a great overtime. The first 39 minutes of that game is like torture. Duke plays terrible. It is not fun.
There is a reason why I have that game as my favorite game of all time, because it underestimates. It tells you the heart of a champion is present no matter what time of the game it is. And if you need 54 seconds to do it at the end of the game and overtime, which is the greatest overtime that's ever been played, then you can do it. Now I go to the greatest game of all time, Duke versus Kentucky, 1992. Duh. All right, next one. This is an interesting one for me because I think it sets up what a champion program looks like. And sometimes you need to experience pain to get to that level. And that's Duke versus Louisville 1986 final. It's even though we lost that game, I think it sets up an entire 3 decades of Duke basketball where everything is great. Now let's go to the fun one. Duke versus UNC 2010, 82-50. Need I say more? And then finally, this is the interesting one for me. Duke versus Maryland in 1999 at home in Cameron. Why that game? Shane Battier's breakout game, 27 points, and he goes on to be, in my mind, one of the greatest players in college basketball history.
I love it. All right, Sam, and by the way, when we get to my list, there will be some overlap there with Donald, but go ahead, Sam, your turn for your 5.
Yeah, let me repeat a couple of Donalds just to be boring. The 1992 Elite Eight game, Christian Laettner, probably the most famous game, the most famous shot in Duke history. So you got to have the 92.
No, not in Duke history, in college basketball history.
In college basketball history, what have you? So the 1992 Elite Eight game that Jason was at, right? Jason was at that game, so he'd like to remind you a few times. Donald wanted you to watch the 1986 loss to Louisville in the national championship game. I agree that it's good to have a bit of humility in this list, but I think it's tough to watch basketball from 1986. So why don't you instead, if you want that little bit of pain, watch the 1999 national championship game against Connecticut? That's it's a tough one to swallow, but I think it'll put you in the mood for comeback, and it'll really get you hating on UConn, which is a thing we don't do very much anymore.
We don't get a chance to do that often.
Exactly. Donald wanted you to watch the Gone in 54 Seconds game, the game at Cole Fieldhouse in 2001. Let me offer a different Duke Maryland game from the same season, the Final Four game, where Duke came back from 22 down at halftime to beat Maryland in the second half, to then proceed to the national championship game where they beat Arizona for their 3rd national championship. I think that 2001 comeback against Maryland is the one to watch. Another one that Duke fans will reference often lovingly, despite the fact that the season didn't end as well as I think we would have hoped, is the late 2005 number 1 versus number 2 game where Duke took on Texas, and JJ Redick probably had his most fantastic performance in a Duke uniform. There have been a number of Duke games during the regular season that have been way hyped for how awesome they were going to be. That game at the beginning of the 2006 season was the JJ Redick is definitely on track to be National Player of the Year. Of course, he split the National Player of the Year award that season with Adam Morrison of Gonzaga, and it was a whole cool back and forth thing that they had throughout that year. But the Texas game was the one to remember. Donald offered you, finally, I'm mirroring him a little bit here. Donald offered you the 2010 UNC beatdown, which I was in attendance for, 82-50. I will offer instead, perhaps maybe a slightly different flavor, but also of the comeback variety, similar to the 2001 Final Four. I'll give you the 2011 Duke versus Carolina game in Cameron, which I was also in attendance for. And that was my senior year. Kyrie Irving, of course, was out with a toe injury. Nolan Smith and Seth Curry keyed a huge comeback against Carolina. Duke was down by double digits at halftime and then pulled away at the end. So in summary, I've got the 92 Final Four. I've got the 99 national championship game. I've got the 2001 Final Four. I've got the 2005 preseason game or early season game. And I've got the 2011 home game against Carolina.
Sam, I think it's great that you mentioned the other really good game against Maryland in the 2001 season. But I mean, first of all, this is not an exclusive list. There are way more games than the three of us will ever have, even though we kind of overlap. But honestly, go back and watch all four of those Duke versus Maryland games in 2001, because you had the Gone in 54, you had the Final Four game, you had the Nate James tip in the ACC tournament. And yes, I think one of the most important games of that year was the loss to Maryland in Cameron, where Boozer broke his foot, and then the famous "it's over" in the DBR forum lore led us to basically kind of revamp and get to the national championship and win it. So I think you take the good with the bad, but those four games stand up as one of in one season, four of the best games that Duke has ever had or even played in. Watch all four of them. But I think the great thing about Sam and I's list and now Jason's, we will have some overlap, but we also have games that, none of us have mentioned because there's so many out there.
Can I add one more game that I thought was really intriguing that would be sort of an interesting lens into the program? Was the UNC game in 2010, the at Carolina game, which was the Brian Zubek breakout game. If you want sort of a turnaround moment, if you're going to reference the 2001 Maryland game where Boozer breaks his foot, the Zubek game, I think, is another great example of inflection points in the season that led to national championships.
All right, so this is totally unfair. By going third, you guys have named almost every game that I had.
Did you have the Zubek game?
So yes and no. I'll explain in just a moment. So my list starts with 1992 Duke versus Kentucky. Of course, it starts with that game.
Duh.
If you are a Duke fan and you have not watched Duke versus Kentucky in 1992, I don't know what you're doing.
I have it on DVD if you want it, because I would love to not own any more DVDs. So, if you want to pay me for shipping and handling, maybe I'll send you my copy of the 92.
What are you, a Columbia House now?
I watched it. I would watch it in college. I bought it from the Duke store when I was in school. And sometimes my roommate and I would get really pumped up for games by watching the 1992 Elite Eight game.
Oh yes. So my next one is, and you guys did not mention this, I have to go back to 1986. The team that started Coach K on his legendary run of Final Fours and launched Coach K and the Duke program into the national stratosphere. The game I picked that I think you should watch from that year is the national semifinal versus Kansas. Duke loses 71-67. I could easily understand someone saying that you need to endure the pain of the next game, the game against Louisville, where Duke loses in the national championship. That game is still too painful for me. I still have not rewatched that game. But that national semifinal against Kansas, Johnny Dawkins got 24 points. Duke wins the game at the very end with Danny Ferry picking the ball up. And Coach K in the post-game news conference, they said, "Why'd you put in Danny?" Because Danny was just a freshman. And back then, freshmen didn't play. And Coach K took out Jay Bilas to put in Danny Ferry. And the reporter said, "Why'd you put in Danny Ferry?" And Coach K said, "I said, Danny, go in there and pick the ball up off the floor and put it in the basket," which is a great answer by Coach K. I will say that alternately, the NIT final, the preseason NIT final in 1986, it was actually 1985, but the 86 season where Duke played and beat Kansas that season was the game that launched Duke to be the number one team in the country that year. And it launched Duke upon the national stage more than any other game has. And it's like the first time that the college basketball world really took notice of Coach K and what he was building at Duke. So that's a possibility as well from 1986. I mentioned, I can't believe we haven't talked more about the 1999 team. The game I want someone to watch from 1999 was on February 3rd. Duke played Maryland and Cameron. Both teams were ranked in the top 10. This is a really good Maryland team in 1999. Duke won the game by more than 20 points. Like, it wasn't even that close. It was over. It was over within like 10 minutes. But you need to experience the dominance of that 1999 team. If you want to go back, there are numerous games team beats teams by 40 points. That 1999 team was unreal. And I think as a Duke fan, you need to see what they were like.
That is the Shane Battier breakout game.
Yes, it is.
I had that on my list too.
And I love it for that. But you have to see with that 99 team what they were able to accomplish. It was crazy. Another one on my list, December 12th, 2005, the JJ Redick game against Texas, where he scores 41 points. Sam, that was already on your list. I think that game cemented JJ as the greatest scorer in Duke history. And then it would be easy. Donald, I know you had the Gone in 54 Seconds. We've talked about the Maryland games. Technically, the last game on my list is the national semifinal versus Maryland, the 22-point comeback. But seeing as you guys already mentioned it, and I want to give Melissa one more, I'm actually going to give her two more. I think the 2010 Butler national title game is truly magical, and I can't believe we haven't mentioned it yet.
Because it still gives me heart palpitations at the end. Even though, I mean, Jason, this was funny. For like 10 years, they would play this game on loop at the Duke store. And every single time you got down to the last 3 seconds, if you were in the store, everyone stopped to watch the shot from Gordon Hayward to make sure it didn't go in. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, it still has not gone in, but every single time you get to that point, every Duke fan still stops and collects their breath to make sure that shot doesn't go in.
As stressful as the Final Four was this year, us being there, Jason, in New Orleans, watching the 2010 national championship game, like heading into that game, I remember the whole conversation was like, neither of these teams plays very quickly. They're very efficient, but they really lock it down on defense. They were sort of both like the Virginia teams under Tony Bennett that would come a few years later. And so the conversation was like, maybe one of these teams gets to 60 and wins this game. Every possession of that game felt so stressful. It wasn't like it was slow, but it was intense.
Okay, so I mentioned that game. I do want to say, if you've already seen that Butler national title game, and I wouldn't be surprised by that, the game to watch, Sam, I think you're wrong about the Brian Zubek breakout game. I do think the Brian Zubek breakout game is the game to watch, but the one to watch is the February 13th, 2010 Duke against Maryland. That's the first game that Brian Zubek was a starter for Duke. First game in his entire career that he started. He goes for 16 points and 17 rebounds. We had no idea. People need to remember, no one thought Brian Zubek could play basketball at all. He was just this big dude.
He could play like, but before that, he was playing like 12, 15 minutes a game.
Yeah. And getting like 4 points and maybe 5 or 6 rebounds. When Duke beat Maryland by 21, Brian Zubek went for 16 points and 17 rebounds. It was so and his dominance on the offensive glass, he had 9 offensive rebounds in that game. That's just a crazy number of offensive rebounds.
Jason, I think that was my memory failing me. It was the Carolina game is where Lance Thomas got hurt prior to that Maryland game. And then the Maryland game was the beginning of the Zubek run. Exactly.
So in any event, I think I gave way more than 5 games there because you guys had stolen so many of mine. I had to give backups.
Let me give you one more, and I'll take it back a long time ago. This is I certainly don't remember this game. This is before my memory of Duke basketball starts. But I know I've seen clips from this game, and I know it was a thriller in a season that ended in some kind of heartbreak for Duke, but is definitely part of the narrative. 1990. I want to take you back to 1990, and I want to take you to the East Regional Final, the Elite Eight game, where Duke beat Connecticut in overtime. It was a thrilling matchup. Of course, it went to overtime. Duke wins by 1 point, and Christian Laettner has one of his very best games in a Duke uniform. If it's not the 1992 Elite Eight game, it might be this Elite Eight game from 1990. Of course, that season ends with Duke getting blown out by UNLV, the whole story about them coming back the next year. But if you watch that 1990 game, you sort of see the makings of Christian Laettner, the greatest player in Duke history.
And everyone recall how that game ended. If you don't recall how that game ended, Christian Laettner hits a last second shot for Duke. It's the launch of Christian Laettner as an absolutely clutch player.
And the final one I'm going to give, this is probably more recent. This backs right up to the 10-year window that we were given. But I'm a fan of stealing the soul from a place. And that place is Chapel Hill. I'm going to go with the Sub-Zero game. Austin Rivers, the buzzer beater at Carolina. Again, that game, a lot of people say that game is dumb, but I stress for you to watch those games because you need to experience pain before you experience glory. And that glory is the last like 3 minutes of that game, highlighted by Sub-Zero Austin Rivers, who I know we don't talk a lot about that 2012 team. There's a lot of issues with that 2012 team, but we can always remember that one. We'll always have Paris, as they say. We will always have Sub-Zero just ripping the soul out of UNC that night. And for the next 4 years, that game was played on repeat every single day because it was one of the more classic buzzer beaters in the history of that rivalry, the greatest rivalry in college basketball.
So again, thanks to Melissa for a great question. Melissa, I know you asked for 5 games. I think we gave you about 18.
47. Yeah.
So you have some homework to do this summer, my dear. But that's going to wrap it up for us here on this episode of the DBR podcast. Again, we thank Jay Bilas, by the way, for joining us a little bit earlier and telling us all about AJ Griffin and what to expect from AJ. For Donald and Sam, I am Jason. DBR podcast in the books. Here's the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.